Interview with Ichikawa, Saou and Polly Barton, authors and translators of Hunchback. With Hunchback now shortlisted for the 2025 International Booker Prize, we spoke to the author and translator about the childhood books that inspired them and how translated fiction can offer something fresh. Published March 14, 2025. Ichikawa, Saou Inspiration Hunchback, and How I Wrote It. Hunchback is the latest in a long line of stories about people with disabilities written throughout history. I wrote it out of a desire to capture truths about life as a disabled person that hadn't been written in previous works, and that most people don't realize. I wrote it over the course of a month and sent it to a publisher. I didn't do any research for this book, but I drew on my years of personal experience and the history of people with disabilities I studied at university helped too. I was conscious that it was special in the sense that I knew Shaka was a kind of protagonist that hadn't been written about before. Books that got me hooked on reading: I loved the Paddington Bear series by Michael Bond, and the Street Clair series by Enid Blyton. Reading the story of how Paddington was so upset about Schubert's unfinished symphony that he rushed to complain to the composer himself instilled in me the determination to always finish every piece I start. The book that made me want to become a writer: I started out my career as an author writing romance novels for young people, and those early attempts were all imitations of Dostoevsky's The Idiot. While I was writing romance, all of my heroines end up as Nastasia. I don't write romances anymore, and I'm constantly surrounded by other kinds of books that I have to read, but in my old age I hope to go back to The Idiot again, and to enjoy it leisurely as a romance novel. Saou Ichikawa, the book that changed the way I think about the world for me. Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse managed to build a bridge with words between my mediocre rational understanding and enlightenment, as a place of acceptance of all that happens in everything in life. The idea that a perfect life, a perfect character isn't something that lies at the end of a journey down a single correct path came as a great salvation to me, with all my love of worldly things, and also provided me with a new challenge. A book originally written in Japanese that I'd recommend to English language readers: there's a book by Ashihei Hino, translated into English in 1939 as Wheat and Soldiers, which isn't widely read in Japan anymore, but which captures the feeling of life in Japan during conscription. The system of categorization that separates normal and disabled bodies is intimately connected to this conscription system, and I believe this will be a central topic for me for the next few years. My interest in it doesn't just stem from my own experience as a disabled person, but rather as someone living through a turning point in history. The International Booker-nominated book Everyone Should Read: The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. Every time I reread this book, I'm astounded by the multifaceted nature of the reality that it conjures into being. Siddhartha book cover: Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. The idea that a perfect life, a perfect character isn't something that lies at the end of a journey down a single, correct path came as a great salvation to me. Saou Ichikawa, Polly Barton. The inspiration and process behind the translation of Hunchback. There are books whose urgency barely needs to be articulated because it's so evident within the work itself, and Hunchback seemed to me like one of those. It burns itself right into the mind of the reader. It's a cinematic work that conjures up a dense and vivid world with very little, so the language needed a lot of honing to make sure that it was hitting all of those imagistic notes in the way that they needed to. I'd say the principal narrative voice came to me quite quickly and intuitively, but there are lots of shifts of register within the span of the book, which took quite a lot of time and attention to capture. The book that made me fall in love with reading the book that comes to mind is The Very Big Secret by Enid Blyton. It's about a bunch of children who look after a baby in secret in the forest. As a child it seemed to me totally wondrous. I think that was the first time I was aware of this sense of fiction as a portal to this world that felt intensely rich and special. The book that made me want to become a translator. I don't think I've really had that reaction to translated fiction, strangely. Reading Antonia Lloyd-Jones' translation of Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead or Anthea Bell's translation of Austerlitz, I think the feeling I have is one of awe. It's a wow, I could never do that feeling. Maybe I've been more inspired by bad translations, which make me think that I could do better. The translator whose work I always look out for, there are quite a few of these. Julia Sanchez is someone whose work I will always feel excited about. Her translation of Eva Balthasar's trilogy is astounding. Polly Barton. C. Gary Laughlin. The book I'm reading at the moment I've just started, You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique. It's too early to say much about it yet, although I'm in love with the fact that it starts with a note from the author to the English translator, Natasha Wimmer. A work of fiction originally written in Japanese that I'd recommend to English language readers. I'm a big fan of Diving Pool and Other Stories by Yoko Ogawa, translated by Stephen Snyder. There's something about the images in those stories that just burn into you right away. Snyder's translation is a searing force that cuts through the prose. Ichikawa Saou とポリー・バートン C. Hunchback 著者ファニージャーへのインタビュー。 Hunchback 2025年のインターナショナルブッカー賞の候補に上がったことを受けに彼らにインスピレーションを与えた子供時代の本について、また洒落たフィクションがどのように新鮮なものを提供できるかについて訪問きました。公開日時公開時期2025年3月14日。視聴サワンインスピレーション入炉。そして私がそれを書いた方法。ハンチバックは、歴史を通じて書かれた障害者についての長い物語の最新のものです。私はこれまでの作品では書かれていなかった そしてほとんどの人が気づいていない障害者としての生活についての真実を捉えたいという願いから書きました。